We're up to Daf Yud Zayin Amud Beis. On the top line, the Gemara quotes the Mishnah of Vim Yesh Eidim Shiyotza Binuma Then Ksubasa Masai Mai Hinuma. The Gemara has some opinions here about what the word Hinuma means. According to Surchav Bar Papa, one of the famous 10 sons of Bar Papa, Bishmei de Zeiri Omar Tanura di Asa. It's kind of a chuppah agula mehadasim. So this is a type of a round chuppah that's made of hadasim. What's hadasim in English? Myrtles, I think. I'm not sure. Anyway, Rabbi Yochanan Amar karisa. He says karisa tseif. Tseif is a kind of a shawl, a nasan al rosha that they put over a head. The yored umachasa seineha. And it covers her eyes. And why is it called Hinuma? Diminamna ba kalsa. Because the kala could go kind of take a little snooze. I don't know how many hours she had to wear this, but if she was exhausted, which chances are good that she's a little bit tired, then she'll be able to sort of close her eyes. Nobody will know the difference. The question is, according to the first opinion of Surchav, what is the meaning of the word hinuma? Because according to the second opinion, hinuma must be lashon tnuma, which means to doze off. But we don't really know how the first opinion of Surchav is going to interpret the etymology of the word hinuma. In any event, Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka Omer, Af Chiluk Kloyos Raya. So there were different customs at the wedding of a Betsula the first time she's married. One of them was to give out these kinds of toasted flakes or things of that sort, maybe nuts. And that would be a siba to prove that she was a Betsula when she got married, and therefore she would collect Masayim Zuz. Tana, we learned in a Brisa. Yehuda Raya, that this minhag was predominant in Yehuda. Bavel Mai, what was the minhag in Bavel? Omar Rav, Nagu, this is really a strange minhag, Nagu, the women in Bavel, they're doge de mishcha. So mishcha is shemen, and our doge is to smear in the oil, aresha derabbanan, on the foreheads of the Talmidim. Now there are two questions. One question is, why was this a siman? And to the answer to that question is, these are dvarim tmuhim. These are unusual kinds of behaviors because, number one, they would pour it on the heads of the Rabbanan. The Rabbanan didn't usually oil their hairs. And the two, it was done by women. I don't know the issues here, but it was done by women. So, Shnei Dvarim Hatmuim, Anoshim Zochramos. This would be embedded in the memory so that people would remember many years later that she was married off as a basula. But as far as the meaning here of this kind of smearing in oil, first of all, I want to point out in the Masechet, he says something which a little bit boggled my mind. He says, B'shas bilas mitzvah zeu hasiman. I'm not sure exactly what that means. Maybe they took the kala after the chuppah into the cheder yichud, and then they did this kind of smearing session, this ritual. But what's the remez here of this ritual? He says that the chassan and kala, you be achdus v'sholom, yachad ke'achiv, v'lo yispardu. Hine matovu manoim shevas achim gam yachad. And the end of the pasuk says, Kishemen atov yored al azaka. So this Mashicha b'Shemen atov is a metaphor for peace and harmony. Now, why put it on the heads of the Talmidei Chachamim? So this is a remez that Schus HaTorah v'lomdeo yogein oleinu. The Torah is nibshala l'shemen, and when we pour it on the heads, it's a symbolic message that the Torah should protect us. Now the Gemara tells a few stories. Amalei Rav Papa Abaye. Mishcha de chafifusa ka'amar ma. Do you have in mind that they would pour this shemen HaMishcha on top of the heads of the Talmidim? And it seems that Rav Papa understood that this shemen was called shemen hamiyuchad lechafifas harosh. I guess you might call it a type of common shampoo. And it bothers Rav Papa that you would do something that's so common and call it a siman. In order for it to be a siman, it should have to be unusual. Amalei, Abaye sort of lashes back at the question. He says, Yasma. Apparently you're like a yasam. A yasam is an orphan that is completely alienated from his parents. He doesn't have parents. And therefore you're alienated. You don't recognize, you're not familiar with this minhag. And now, in a rhetorical question, Abaye asks, Rav Papa lo avdalach imach ardoge mishcha aresha derabanan das maisa. He asks him, did your mother not implement this custom of pouring oil on the heads of the students at the time of your wedding? Kiha, like the story of Hahu Mirabanan, one of the Chachamim, the Asik Le Lebre, Bei Rabba Bar Ula. He married off a woman for his son. And who is that woman? She is the daughter of Rava Bar Ula. V'yamri others say Rabba Bar Ula. Yasik le'lebrei, be'ahu mirabanan, v'dardei mishcha aresha derabana b'shas ma'is, at the time of the Nesua. So the Gemara quotes these stories to prove and demonstrate that they did do these minhagim with the shemen at the wedding of a besua. The Gemara asks, Armalasa mai, what simanim would they implement in order to declare that this is a second marriage? Tani Rav Yosef, Armalasa, Leslie Kisni. Kisni are those kloyos, those kind of, oven-dried cereal. And the very fact that they didn't give it out at the wedding means that they're testifying that this is already a second nesuin. So that's called Almana Lesla Kisni. Gemara says, we learned in our Mishnah, this starts a big sugya. So someone comes to somebody, let's say Reuben comes to Shimon, And he says, Shimon, this field that I'm living on belonged to your father, but I bought it from you. And normally, once we set up a marakama, then you're not believed without a riot. But here he's believed. Why? Because Reuven is telling Shimon that this field once belonged to his father. Shimon has no clue. Shimon assumed as a Darpash that Reuven owned the field. So the Gemara asks the following question. If this Mishnah is coming to teach us that although Rabbi Yeshua rejected the migu of Mishras Tanin and Asti or to Makbetzeis, but nevertheless he accepts this migu, in a case where the other person's not even being toveim at all, it's ein char shakal lefanav. So the listening mode Rabbi Yeshua be omel chaver sada zuchal chahaisa ulakachtia bimenu. Why complicate matters and introduce another variable that he says, well, this field once belonged to your father, and you inherited from your father. But in truth, you didn't inherit it because your father sold it to you. But why go through those complicated somersaults? Why not say gleich, simple, straightforward? Sada zushal chahaisa, this field belonged to you, ulakachtia mimcha, and I bought it from you. So it means that if Reuven is telling Shimon that this field once belonged to Shimon himself, then Shimon had no clue that this field belonged to him at any time. So that's called a peshasa peshaita. He believed to say that I bought it from him. So the basic chidush of pesha asar, which is called ein shar shachal lefanecha, that we could derive from a straightforward case where sada zushal chahaisa lekachtia mimen. Although, honestly, it's a little bit strange because that case, that scenario is very far from reality. I mean, under what circumstances would I tell you that this field belonged to you and you didn't know about that? And not only that, but how can it be that not only did this field once belong to you, but now he's telling you about a bill of sale and you sold the field? He doesn't remember any of this? What, he had amnesia or something? I don't know. Anyway, the Gemara answers, the reason why the Mishnah mentioned the case of Sada Zuchal Avicha Haisa is because we're going to derive and teach a chidush based on that case in the Sefer of the Mishnah. And what happened in the Sefer of the Mishnah? In Yesh Edim Sheishalo, V'hu Melekachtia Mimenu Eno Nema. So again, the Mishnah wants to say that if we know, based on objective evidence of two witnesses, that this field of Chaim once belonged to him, then his whole Peshasa Peshit falls by the wayside. Hechi Damit. What's the exact case? If the person who is holding on to the field now, he's called a Masechet, he's been on the field and exploiting the field for 2 additional years, all told 3 years, right? Shnei Chazaka is a Milo Mehema. Why can't he believe to say I bought it from you? He's got Shnei Chazaka. So why does the Sefer the Mishnah say that Eino Neman, he has chazaka? The idolo achla, you're going to have to say that he didn't eat the field for 3 years. No one's believed to say this field is mine and I bought it from you without producing a shtar, unless he has 3 years of chazaka. So the Gemara's answer here is that pshita d'lo meheiman. There will be no chiddush in the Mishnah if we're talking about a case of Sada Zushal Chahais. So Gemara says, wait a minute, you're telling me pshita, I'm going to tell you pshita in the case of the Mishnah. Ihachi gabi aviv nami. I'm going to go through the whole Shakavitarya. Idi achel shnei chazaka amay lo mehema. The ida lo achel shnei chazaka is pshita d'lo mehema. It means that to be motzi a piece of karka micheskas marakama, you need a shtar. He doesn't have a shtar. He didn't eat 3 years of chazaka. So, I mean, that's elementary. That's basic. He can't prove anything against the marakama. So now the Gemara is going to try to explain why there would be a chiddush in our Mishnah in the Sefer in the case of Sada Zushal Avichoisa, which would not have a parallel chiddush in Sada Zushal Cha. So during the lifetime of the father, he ate 2 years of chazak. The 3rd year he ate after the father died, and the ben was a katan. So the Tana of Mishnah wants to be mechadish that last year in which he was eating the fruits of the tree after the death of the father, and the child himself was still a katan, Rav Huna, the Rav Huna, ein machzikim v'nitzei katan afilu higdil. In other words, everything depends on the critical moment when the machzik went down to the field. If at that point the marakama was a katan, then even later when he accumulates many years of chazaka post-gadlus, that's not a chazaka. Because everything depends upon when he originally went down to be machzik the son. So everything seems to be fine now, and we understand why Sada Zushal Avicha has a chiddush in the Sefer when there were 2 years of Chazaka B'chaya Av and the 3rd year B'chaya Ben, but where in the Mishnah do you see such a thing? Rav Huna. So again, we're going to say that's the interpretation of the Mishnah, but where do we find a chiddush now? In Rav Huna, Rav Huna says, "Ein machzikim b'nichsei katan afilu higdil," and if we didn't have that, there would be a chazaka. So it turns out that Rav Huna is basically reiterating what the Mishnah says, and the Gemara is bothered by this. Rav Huna masnisin asal ashminon. Rav Huna feels compelled to teach the Mishnah, and the Gemara offers 2 answers. Ibai say Rav Huna diyuka de masnisin ka'amar. Rav Huna is only meant to teach us a diuk in the Mishnah. Ibai sema, a slightly different alternative. Afilu higdil kamashmo. Even if the machzik has been sitting in the field for years, no one was mocha, and the katan became a gadol. So at that point, when he became a gadol, he should have heard about the macha and watched the shtar, etc., etc. So to make a long story short, Rav Huna is interpreting and shedding light on the Mishnah, and therefore it's called a chidush. So the Gemara asks for listening b'didei. You know what? Even if we had Sada Zuchal Chalaisa, we would still have a chiddush in the Sefer. V'lukma kigon sha'achla shtayim b'fanav v'acha shelo b'fanav u'kigon shebara. So again, we can have the chiddush that we had in Sadazu Shalchais in the case of Sadazu Shalavichais in the case of Sadazu Shalchais. And the Mishnah is going to be, again, addressing this very complicated scenario where he ate 2 years in front of the Marakama and a third year Shalom, b'fanav Kagon Barach. The Ma'arer just had to flee. There was a threat to the Jewish community. So Kigon Shabarach in the Masechet, he calls him the Ma'arer. The Ma'arer, I think, is the Marakama in this case. So the Chiddush is that even though he had to become a fugitive and he ran away, he couldn't make a mecha. So therefore, that year in which he couldn't make a mecha is not integrated into the 3 years. So after his brecha, after he runs away, then since he doesn't have the possibility of making a mecha as a running fugitive, is therefore there's no chazak. I just want to, what does that mean? Oh, I get it. Because that breaks up the Rayas Chazaka. If the Ma'arer, who we said is the Marakama, didn't have the possibility of making a Macha, then the fact that so-and-so squatted and lived on his field for 3 years doesn't prove a thing. The Gemara says, why? Just because he was Boreach, therefore he couldn't make a Macha. Baruch Machmas Mai. Either Baruch Machmas Nefashos, is Pshita de lo Mehemen. If the Marakama, he calls him the Ma'arer, was fleeing for his life, certainly you couldn't have imagined that he would gather together 3 Eidim or whatever you need to make a Macha. He's worried, he's fleeing for his life. Ve'ida Barach Machmas Momon, let's say he's running away from, not from the authorities who accuse him of murder, but from his debtors, his creditors. Is he Boilelim Chuye? He should have made a mecha. And therefore, even that year where he was running away for financial pressures, that year could be mitzuraf to the minion of Shalosh Shana, because he should have made a mecha. The kaimalon mecha shelo b'fanav havya mecha. And since mecha shelo b'fanav havya mecha, he didn't make a mecha. Therefore, the chazak of the machzik is valid. There's something missing here. Just 1 second. So the Chiddush in the Mishnah, before the Gemara's analysis of Baruch Machmas Mai, is that in a case where the Ma'ar could not possibly make the Mecha, then that year is not mitzuraf to the Shnas Chazak. So this is all the kasha of the Gemara. So the Gemara now says Baruch Machmas Mai. So Mimanav Shach. There's no way that you can salvage this dot in the Mishnah, because if he was Boreach Machmas Nefashos, then the Mishnah is not being Mechadish me anything. Because that year in which he couldn't be Mocha is not mitzurf to the years of Chazak. And if on the other hand, he was Boreach Machmas Mamon, then he Boilele Mechuye, and it's a Mecha Shel B'fanav which is valid, and he's required to make that Mecha. So how can the Sefer tell us that there's no chazaka? There really would be a chazaka. Why? Because he should have made a mecha. Because mecha shelo b'fanav having mecha, and if he didn't make a mecha, then the chazaka should be chal. So why is the Mishnah telling us in the Sefer that the chazaka is not chal? And now the Gemara is going to prove that mecha shelo b'fanav is considered a mecha. This now we learned in the Mishnah in Bava Basra. If he was Boreach and we try to analyze the Mishnah. What is the title of the Mishnah hold? Then I feel Yehuda v'Golia. Why does it say that if he was in Yehuda and he made his chazak in Yehuda, but the Marakama is in Golil, that it's not considered a chazaka. Why? Are you telling me that Mecha Shelo B'Fanav Havi Mecha? Therefore, the chazaka is valid. So then, even in the case of Yehuda and Golil, where the Balas Sada happens to be located in Yehuda, the Sada itself is in the Golil, and somebody in the Golil made a chazaka. Nami, even in such a case, the Mecha would be a Mecha, and therefore the absence of Mecha would be a chazaka. But the Gemara doesn't understand why the Mishnah put the law down on Yehuda versus Golil. Forget about Yehuda versus Golil. Even within Yehuda, you would have a Mecha Shelo B'Fanav, and if you hold Mecha Shelo B'Fanav Lo Avi Mecha, then even in Yehuda, there would be no chazak. And if on the other hand, Mecha Shelo B'Fanav Havi Mecha, so then even if he's in Yehuda and the son is in Golil or vice versa, we should still have a valid chazak. If on the other hand, because some Mecha Shelo B'Fanav Lo Avi Mecha, then Afilu Yehuda v'Yehuda Nami Lo, even two cities within the same country, it also should be mufka from having a chazak. So the Gemara answers, Amar Rabbi Abba Bar Mama, Li'olam Kasar Mecha Shelo B'Fanav Havi Mecha. So he could have made a Mecha, and he should have made a Mecha even Shelo B'Fanav. So if they're both in the same country, but it's Shelo B'Fanav, then he could make a Mecha. And if he doesn't make a Mecha, then the chazaka is a chazaka. Umasnisid. Ascherim shon. So now the Gemara says, if the Shascherim, there's no, there's no Shayoros Mitzuyos, no one's going to take his chazaka and bring it to the attention of the Marakama. And the Marakama is going to say, well, I didn't hear about any Mecha. I'm sorry, the Masechet is going to say, I didn't hear of any Mecha. So the Gemara asks, Maishna Yehuda v'Golil did Nakat. Why does the Mishnah isolate it as Yehuda v'Golil? I mean, really, it depends upon whether it's Shas Cherem or not.